Hi everyone, my name is Richard Santoro and I welcome you to Third and Zen, the YouTube channel where every week I'm sharing a spiritual message to nourish ourselves, heart, mind, body, and soul. First, thank you for stopping by the channel. Thanks for checking out today's video. I do hope that this video finds you doing well, and I hope that you're taking the time to care for yourself, heart, mind, body, and soul. Let's jump right in. Let's take a moment. Pardon me. Let's all take a nice deep breath. Take a moment, just be still. Just allow ourselves to just loosen, soften, release any tension we might be carrying. Just ease into the moment and just breathe. Do our best to just be present. And let's get started with today's message, shall we? Let me tell you a story. One day, not too long ago, I went to the park for a walk. It was an absolutely lovely day. I was hoping to connect with God, as I often do on these walks. You see, I wanted answers, and I wanted insights, life directions, paths, what's next, things like that. And I also wanted to write a sermon, so I wanted the Holy Spirit to guide me on that as well. And truth be told, as I was walking, as I was hoping for all of this, I was forcing things. I wanted answers from God. Give me answers and insights and give them to me now. I was walking, and again, it was a lovely day out in nature, so blessed, but I was forcing it. I'm ready. I'm here. I'm listening. My will be done. My time. I'm ready to hear you now. So, to recap, here I was, me, urging the God of all creation and time and space, me, imploring Jesus, the Logos, the Word made flesh. And you would think that I would know better. I mean, I absolutely do know better. But here I was anyway, being a bit impatient with God. Even after all this time and spiritual journeying I've done, all the learning and teaching and preaching, here I was doing that. So I stopped. I literally just stopped walking. Or should I say, by God's grace, I stopped. Yet again, thankfully. I took a breath, and I was reminded in that moment, by God's grace, to look at where I was, to literally just stop and look around. It was lovely. Trees, blue skies, leaves, nature, fresh breeze. It was so nice. And I was reminded, by God's grace, to simply be, to just walk. No more forcing things. Stop all of that. Just walk. Just notice. Just be. So then, as I walked, I thought of Mr. Rogers. Don't know why I did, but I did. Or rather, I should say that by God's grace, the thought of Mr. Rogers came to me. Mr. Rogers, who is someone I've never been shy about declaring as a beloved hero and inspiration of mine. So again, I just walked and I breathed and I noticed the loveliness around me, and I didn't force things. And by God's grace, I thought of Mr. Rogers. And I thought to myself, everyone loves Mr. Rogers. And I thought to myself, he's a lovely thought. And I continued to just walk, just be. And I thought to myself, or rather by God's grace, the thought came to me. Mr. Rogers was always an advocate of slowing down. He was always encouraging us to slow down. And he intentionally showed us how to really slow down and how to really listen and how to really hear. The opening of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, when he is singing It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, the camera pans through his home, and he made it a point to have a flashing yellow traffic light right there among the decor as a reminder to all of us to just slow down. And Mr. Rogers also, in his speech pattern, he spoke very deliberately, not rushing things. As someone once said, every word is a pearl. And Mr. Rogers talked about how he did this intentionally, speaking at a non-rushed pace, slowing down, allowing people to hear what he was saying, very intentionally, not rushing himself, so that his thoughts could be communicated, not rushing the listener, allowing them to be able to hear what he was communicating, and also allowing the listener to in turn model that and give that person silent permission to also not rush, to slow down, to let themselves communicate at an easy pace. So again, in this moment, while I'm taking this walk through the park, I went from rushing God and forcing things to, by God's grace, slowing down, patiently just being. And by God's grace, being ready to listen if and when it was God's time to communicate, not my time. That's what I heard in that moment in the park, by the grace of God. Stop. Slow down. Just be. Listen. Hear. And also, Mr. Rogers. As the psalm says, be still and wait patiently upon the Lord. And in this particular case, and in my case, I firmly believe that as a clear and direct reminder for me, God added that layer of, okay, Richard, just so that I know you'll hear me, I'll give you this thought of Mr. Rogers, who I know you love and admire so much. Slow down. Listen. Hear. And setting my story about walking in the park aside for a moment, we really are in such a rush, aren't we? Things all the time, rushing around, thoughts rushing around internally, and us rushing around externally. Go, do, now. And we have such a massive influx of stimulation and input from the world around us, just blasting us all the time. It can be overwhelming at times. It's tough to focus, to sift, to process. And when all of it is overwhelming us, it can create this quasi sense of urgency in so many areas of our lives and in so many relationships in our everyday life and journey. And it can force us to have a habit of forcing things, like Veruca and Willy Wonka. Now, I want it now. Our time, now. And if you're like me and my story about my walk in the park, all of this, at times, can bleed over into our spiritual life and our relationship with God. Now, God, I'm listening. Talk. My will be done. Maybe that doesn't happen in actual verbalized word, but often in general internal vibe. I'm listening. Answers now. But slow down. Be still. Notice. Wait patiently on the Lord. And then, by God's grace, listen. Hear. And as I just alluded to, perhaps we can also apply this to our everyday lives and relationships and interactions with the world around us. A friend of Mr. Rogers once shared that during a phone call, Mr. Rogers said to him, "Do you know the most important thing in the world to me right now? Talking with you on the phone." That was his way with whomever he was speaking with, whether it was kids or strangers or loved ones. He was intentional in giving that person his full presence, and he was deliberate in listening to them and hearing them. And one can recall the Gospels where over and over again, when Jesus had something really important to say, and he really wanted people to hear him, really wanted it to land for them, Jesus said to people, "Let you who have ears hear." And conversely, I can also recall in the Gospels all the times when people came to Jesus and he listened to them. He engaged them in active listening, in being fully present, in intentionally listening to them and hearing them. Even when he was tired and worn and put upon, even when his disciples tried to shoo people away, Jesus slowed down. He stopped. He was still, and he actively listened to people. So again, like Jesus, like Mr. Rogers, perhaps we too can be intentional in our listening to other people. Perhaps we can be deliberate about being fully present and listening to and hearing people. Slow down. Be still. Listen. Hear. Let me close today with this. As I said, Mr. Rogers is a hero of mine. He is on my Mount Rushmore of influences in my adult life. His theology, psychology, child psychology, ministry, and his general approach to all things have shaped and influenced every aspect of me as a person and in my years of ministry and spiritual service and in my relationships. And I say that for a reason that I will make clear in just a moment. But first, some of you may have already heard this little anecdote about Mr. Rogers. The story first appeared in a book, Dear Mr. Rogers, Does It Ever Rain in Your Neighborhood? A collection of letters received by Mr. Rogers from children throughout his career with his replies to them. I mean, how awesome is that right there? But anyway, if you recall on the show, Mr. Rogers would feed his fish that were in the fish tank right there in his home, and he would go in the little kitchen area and a little peppering of food, fish food right in the tank, and that was that. Well, Mr. Rogers received a letter from a little girl, 5-year-old Katie, from her family. Katie, who was blind, expressed concern over the fish. She said, Dear Mr. Rogers, please say when you are feeding your fish, because I worry about them. I can't see if you are feeding them. So please say you are feeding them out loud. And that is why, going forward, each episode, Mr. Rogers would always narrate himself feeding the fish, saying, I'm feeding the fish, so that Katie could hear him and know. Isn't that just lovely? He was the best. A little girl whose senses required specific, intentional communication from Mr. Rogers so that she could hear him. A little girl who was listening asked Mr. Rogers for communication and assurance. And Mr. Rogers heard her. And Mr. Rogers, with love and care, made sure that she heard him. As I said when I opened this message, I started the original journey of this message by walking in the park and forcing things. And then I was reminded by God and the grace of God to stop, to be still, to be patient. And I was reminded by the grace of God that when God is ready, to listen, to hear. And then all of this that I just shared, this entire message, at the end of my walk in the park, I got back into the car and I literally typed this entire message out on my phone, just click, clack, right there, all of it verbatim. And honestly, I got choked up when I typed the story about Mr. Rogers and that girl, because I just love Mr. Rogers. He was so lovely, so Christ-like, so kind, and that story is so sweet and lovely and gracious. And also because of what Mr. Rogers means to me, and because of what Mr. Rogers did for that girl and for countless others. And because I realized that that's exactly what God just did for me in that moment with love and grace. Richard, slow down. Richard, stop. Richard, Be still. And like Mr. Rogers announcing every episode that he was feeding that fish because he heard that little girl, and so that she could hear him and be assured, in the same way, God said to me, I'm here. Listen. And God said, and because I love you, and so that I know you will hear me, I'll make it a story about Mr. Rogers for you. God's grace in God's time. My friends, as we enter this season of Lent, and just as we journey in life, slow down. Be still. Listen. Hear. Thanks be to God. Amen. Okay, my friends, I want to thank you again for stopping by the channel, checking out today's video. I did forget to mention in the beginning of the video, and I mentioned it towards here at the end of the message, that we do find ourselves now in the season of Lent, that time after Ash Wednesday, and we enter Lent where we're in that season of preparation, that season leading up to Holy Week and the crucifixion and the resurrection. So I do wish you a good spiritual journey going forward. And I wish you nothing but love and peace and fellowship with God in your journey. Thank you all for being here. I love you all. Have a great day. Ciao, ciao.